Hello everyone, welcome back to AE course. In this session, we are going to talk about receptors and their types, and a little about its definition and its function. First of all, what is the role of receptors? You can see it here. Receptors, they have several rules. The first things, it's for communication between the cells. So receptors, they're used for communication between cells. The other thing is that these receptors, there are transmembrane protein and which combine, and these receptors, they combine to a specific molecule. When I say specific molecule, I mean ligands. Ligands, there are those molecules that are able to bind to the receptors and can cause changes. For example, hormones or neurotransmitter. These are ligands. So ligands, there are those specific molecules that are able to bind to the receptors. We call them ligands. And you can see here the general function of the receptors. Ligands, they carry the message and then they bind to the receptors. As they bind to the receptor can change its shape and transfer uh, that signal into the cell, and this process called signal transduction. I will explain the definition of the signal transduction in a minute. And as they change the extracellular signal into the intracellular signal, the response will be produced. And that is the general idea about receptors. Also, I've told you that there is a signal transduction that will happen. This signal transduction is a changing is a changing of extracellular signal into an intercellular signal. So changing of a extracellular signal into intercellular signal, it's called signal transduction. And it must happen, and it is one of the most important function of the receptors. Then our receptor, based on their location, they divided into two types. First one is intracellular receptors, the other one is cell surface receptor. I will discuss these types very briefly and just mention those important parts about them. First of all, what are those intracellular receptors? Intracellular receptors, those receptors which are located inside of the cell. They can either locate on the nucleus membrane or they can locate it in the cytoplasm, or also they can be in the membrane of the other organelles as well, such as mitochondria. And their ligands is those small hydrophobic molecules, which can diffuse easily through the cell membrane, and then they can cause changes. So these small hydrophobic molecule, they pass through the cell membrane by simple diffusion. You can see it here. For example, these steroid hormone, they pass through the cell membrane by the simple diffusion because they're hydrophobic, and the cell membrane is also hydrophobic. And as it passed through the cell membrane, it entered to cytoplasm, and from cytoplasm, it can either bind to those receptors which are in the cytoplasm or which are found on the nucleus membrane. And as it binds to one of these receptors, it's gonna enter to the nucleus. And as it enters to the nucleus, it will bind to a specific part of the DNA and initiate transcription and translation and produce new protein or inhibit production of protein. There are some examples that are useful to know and are related to the they have intercellular receptor. Those steroid hormones such as testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone, they have intracellular receptor. Then the other receptors that we have also, it is cell surface receptor. As the name says, these receptor, they're located on the membrane. These receptor, they located on the membrane. And these receptors are integral membrane protein. These are integral. It means, for example, as it is my membrane, these receptors, they pass through whole membrane. So this is called integral protein. This is my receptor. Then these cell surface receptor, they will bind to those hydrophilic molecule. So the other one was hydrophobic, but this is hydrophilic molecule. And there are some examples such as protein hormone, like insulin, glucagon, and so forth. There are two types that's good to know. One of them is uh, channel linked receptors, and the other one is G protein linked receptor. Channel linked receptors, those receptors, those link receptors which are linked to the ion channel, you can see it here. These are linked to ion channel, and as the ligand bind to these receptor, the channel either gets opened or closed. One of the example for this type of receptor is acetylcholine. So acetylcholine can bind to these receptor and open the channel. It's for muscle excitation and muscle contraction. So channel link, it is those receptors which are linked to the channel, ion channel, and as the ligand bind to them, it will get open. Then the other receptors, the other cell surface receptor is G protein linked receptor. G protein receptor, it is a receptor that indirectly activates or inactivates the separates membrane bound enzyme or ion channel, and that enzyme or ion channel causes production of signals, and that signal make changes in the cells and produce response. And there is a mediator between a receptor and then the ion channel or those membrane bound um, enzyme, and that mediator is called G protein, and that mediator is called G protein. You can see it here. These type of receptor, it's a chain of event will happen through these type of receptor, and at the end of these parts of these kind of receptor, it will produce a secondary messenger. These secondary messengers like IP3 or calcium ion or CAMP. Then these secondary messenger, they causes changes in the cell and produce response. That is briefly explanation about G protein link receptors and all the other receptors that we have, and I hope it was useful for you. Thank you.